Hi everyone, I'm Jonas Schulman, Head of Communications at Security Token Market. We are at the Vertalo conference, and I'm here today with Neil Zumwalde of Credmark.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So tell me about your project.
So Credmark is a decentralized DeFi risk platform. So we monitor all the different DeFi platforms to let the decentralized world know what sort of financial risks are present in these various platforms. So currently what we have is things like AMMs, we've got over-collateralized lenders, and we've got yield aggregators. Below that, we've got things like stablecoins, and we've got volatile tokens that represent different DeFi platforms, that represent just crypto in general. And so we take all of that and say, how does this kind of end product, which in most cases is some way to generate yield on either community treasury, if you're talking about a DAO, it could be a portfolio, if you're talking about a hedge fund, how are you exposed to risks even as these DeFi platforms themselves are generating yield for you and are operating essentially as they should?
Interesting.
So as compared to like Code Auditor, which is going to say mechanically, does this behave how the developer expects it to?
Right.
We're saying, okay, if this is behaving how the developer expects it to, is it well conceived enough that there's no way for like a complete failure to happen on this pool, even under lack of an exploit, even under something that's not a hack?
Right.
Or if there is an exploit, how do the ripples affect essentially the money of the people who are the users of these different platforms?
Interesting. So you are not necessarily an auditor of the code, you said, but you are a risk auditor from the investor's perspective, it sounds like. To risk. So what would, if I'm investing in DeFi projects trying to get yield, I'm yield farming, how would I use your platform to identify my risks associated with certain coins?
Yeah, so the easiest way is to just do a comparative analysis, right? Okay. If I am saying I want to lend out my assets, right?
Right.
My choices are Aave or Compound. You actually have more choices than that, but
those two common ones.
for the purposes of this, I usually use those two.
Okay.
Now those two platforms operate in a really similar way, but people think of it as sort of a no-risk kind of scenario, where I can get, it might be a variable interest rate, but I'm going to get some interest rate on my stablecoins. So if I have USDC, for example, and I am saying I'm going to put it in Aave at 5%, which is pretty typical.
Right.
What can actually happen is what we would be looking at is the reserves. So we would say if you put in $1 million and suddenly less than $1 million is left in the Aave reserves, which happens way more frequently than you would think, then you actually are running into a liquidity risk because you can't remove your assets from the platform, which is not a good thing. Then, which is fine because then the interest rate on the borrow goes up and eventually
incentivize people to deposit.
So the incentives are correct, and so that's the risk analysis that they're doing. But if you pair that with a market down event on the collateral, then suddenly people are supposed to be liquidating those loans that become under collateralized.
Right.
But if you fall below 5% under collateralized, then it's not economical for those to be liquidated in the first place, and they're generating enormous amounts of interest, which means that the more time you end up in that state, the worse the problem becomes, and suddenly the people who have been borrowing have no incentive to pay back their loans, and no one who has lent out their assets can retrieve their assets. So those are the kind of scenarios that we're stress testing and finding the limits of that, and we can tell you essentially how close these various pools are to reaching those points of insolvency.
So will you send out kind of like a warning? So if I'm an investor using Credmark, what would it warning, like liquidity pool of Aave is decreasing.
Yeah.
Like, what would it look like, communication-wise?
So we would just be providing an API to the people who are providing these types of things. Now, we've talked a lot about whether or not we're going to collect personal PII, and we've decided that in the short term we're not going to. We could create a notification system using like the Ethereum push notifications, things like that. Right now that's further down the roadmap.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. But I think that is obviously a pretty good warning of an impending doom is sort of a pretty good use case.
It'd probably be, it'd probably be good to know if that's coming. Be like, oh, I can't access my money now. Shit.
Yeah. Like, and like, there's a bunch of people who end up in that scenario all the time.
I'm sure.
Where it's like, and sometimes the actual protocols that are built on top of Aave and Compound are the ones who end up in that illiquid scenario. So if that were to happen, the cascading effect would go all, first to like Curve finance, then that would cascade to Yearn finance, and pretty much every pool is insolvent that's built on top of it. So like, it's probably useful for someone to be watching out for
Absolutely.
that to happen.
Are you kidding me? It's going to collapse the entire DeFi market if you're not prepared for it.
Pretty easily.
That
Surprisingly
sounds pretty crazy.
easily. Yeah.
That's kind of scary to think about. Have we come close to that point at all?
Yeah.
Damn. When was the recent time that happened?
I want to say June was the most recent time. Although, you know, it happens on different assets at different times. Sometimes, like, these stabilization factors can be, it can emerge. And Aave says that they have, like, emergency protocols in place to prevent these types of things, which is good, but...
they need to leverage you guys.
Yeah, to look at what's next. Yeah.
So how many, what stage of development are you in? Do you have users actively using this, or where are you at?
We are in the qualitative side of our research, and we're going to be like doing qualitative research for the next few months with a few partners who are offering like rehypothecation services or like centralized yield aggregation, things like that, to look at just their portfolios. And then we're building out the project so that people can contribute their own risk models. And then we've got 3 different types of users. We've got developers, so model creators, model consumers, and model validators. And as these different risk models start to come to fruition through our platform, we're going to balance these things so that we've got the right amount of each type of user in our platform. And that'll probably be about around December, January. And in the short term, we're just working with partners to kind of do analysis on how they're allocating their portfolio within the DeFi ecosystem.
Very cool. I have a personal question. I feel like a lot of people are probably thinking this as well. I've seen a lot of, DeFi pools and yield farming opportunities with like thousands of percent of APY. How is that possible? And is that like, is that very risky if you put $100 in, it says 1,000%? Like, am I going to lose that money, or am I, tell me more about that.
We have a mantra where if you can't tell where the risk is, or if you can't tell where the yield is coming from, you are the yield, right? And so a lot of that stuff is like just Ponzi schemes.
Yeah, it's definitely too good to be true. Like,
there's
anything above like 0.2%. I mean, not really, but like the banks have like.
It's very conservative.
No. I was just saying because the banks give you basically nothing.
Right.
So
that's their risk.
You go to centralized finance like BlockFi, you get like 5%. I'm like, that's incredible. But and then you go to 1,000%.
Yeah.
But yeah, continue. Yeah.
Well, if something's nascent enough, then I think like they still have a lot of their supply to divvy out.
Right.
If it's just about making distribution of their supply based on like loyalty to a project, that's usually where people kind of start on those yield things.
Got it.
And there's even been a lot of pressure on our project to hit those kinds of APYs, which we could do, but it doesn't make a lot of sense for us. Like we're the conservative play. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not just gonna like give away another million of our token just to get 50,000 yields so that the Pepe frogs on the internet can jump in.
So in a
which
way,
is like an effective strategy. I've seen it work. It works with anything that's named after a dog. So
this is true. We've seen Dogecoin go pretty high.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So a lot of times the APY is really high just to get users on the platform. It's a very short term.
Yeah,
it has to be.
I mean, and it's a good way to get users on a platform, but in my opinion, it's a really, really, really expensive customer acquisition.
It sounds like it. Are you kidding?
Because essentially, like, you're paying these people a future amount of your token that is like massive in order to just acquire them as a customer under a totally different incentive structure than the value of your platform.
Exactly.
So
very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Neil, for coming on.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure.
But if anyone wants to learn more about what you're working on, how can they contact you?
You can go to credmark.com, credmark.com. You could email info@credmark.com, but my favorite way is to click that little Discord link and join our Discord, because that's where we've got broken out all of the different things that we're doing right now. Right now we're running a hackathon to analyze Uniswap v3 risk of impermanent loss.
Very cool.
And to generate strategies on that. And we've also got Smart Pool, which is like a little tool that helps you use the strategies that you build.
That's awesome.
So that's kind of like our first user-facing product, and you can go watch the hackathon happen on our Discord.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Neil. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.